My daughter went missing 3 years ago, and everyone assumed she was dead. Then came a national writing contest. An essay grader dialed 911 with trembling hands. A contestant had written a single chilling message inside their essay: "My mother has kept me locked in her basement for 3 years. This is my only chance to call for help." And the specific home address was listed in it. When the police kicked my front door off its hinges, I was sitting on the couch watching TV. They rushed past me and found a girl trapped behind a heavy wooden door leading underground. However, that girl wasn't my daughter. My house doesn't even have a basement. She's not my daughter. The second the words left my mouth, the rescued girl broke free from the officer's arms and threw herself at my feet. "Mom, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I won't try to run away anymore. Just please, don't turn off the lights again." Her voice was raw and raspy, like her vocal cords were rusted from disuse. Her fingers clamped down on the hem of my jeans tightly. I stared down at her face, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. "Who are you calling Mom?" She lifted her head, tears streaming down her dirty face. "Mom, you said it yourself. You said if I ever told anyone, I wouldn't be Claire anymore." All eyes in the room were on me. Captain William Hayes stepped between me and the girl, his voice dropping into a low, lethal tone. "Karen Vance, back off from the victim." "I'm not touching her," I said, locking eyes with him. "I'm not saying she wasn't hurt, Captain. But I'm telling you, that girl isn't my daughter." Captain Hayes pulled a printed sheet of paper from his file and set it on the coffee table. "This is a copy of the essay." The contestant wrote that she was being held captive in a basement by her own mother, Karen Vance, for the last 3 years. The street name, the house number, even the hidden steel door concealed behind the utilities shelving in the storage room. Every detail checked out. My chest caved in as I read those lines. The handwriting wasn't Claire's. Then my eyes caught the bottom corner of the page. There, etched in faint blue ink, was a tiny crescent moon. It was the secret mark my daughter used to draw whenever she was terrified as a little girl. I reached out to grab the paper, but Captain Hayes slapped his palm down over it. "You can't touch the evidence." "Just answer me one thing," I said, my voice barely a whisper as I forced myself to look up at him. "The door your men just breached. Does it lead down from inside my house, or is it an entry punched through from the house next door?" Captain Hayes' brow twitched. Before he could answer, a young officer said, "Captain, we've got a situation outside. A huge crowd is gathering." A roar of angry voices shattered the window glass right on cue. "Bring out the monster. Don't let her get away with it. They just dragged a teenage girl out of her basement, and she's still lying." I spun around. Dozens of teenagers and neighbors were pressed against my front gate, their phone screens blazing like blinding white daggers. Captain Hayes' face darkened. "Who leaked the crime scene?" Nobody answered. The girl on the floor suddenly shrieked, "Mom, please. Don't let them film me. You said if I ever saw the light of day again, I deserved to die." A female officer dropped to her knees, draping a uniform jacket over the girl's trembling shoulders. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. We're right here." Instead of pulling away, the girl dragged herself across the hardwood toward me, crying hysterically. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'll never write another essay. I'll never mention the basement again." The mob outside exploded. Even through the heavy glass, the screams from the live streamers echoed clearly. "She's still begging her for mercy. How can a mother do that to her own kid? Lock her up. Give her the death penalty. Stop defending her." They literally dug the basement out of her house. I opened my mouth to speak, but I realized that any further explanation would be useless at this moment. Captain Hayes stared at me. "Karen, anything you want to put on the record? If I tell you she's not Claire, would you actually believe me?" "I believe the evidence." "Then run her DNA," I snapped. "Already ordered," Captain Hayes said flatly. He paused, stepping closer. "Until the lab results come back, you're coming with us." Suddenly, the front door burst open. A teenage girl holding a selfie stick barged past the police tape, thrusting her phone right into my face. "You trapped a child in a hole for 3 years. Does your conscience even work?" she asked. "Get her out of here." Captain Hayes barked. The streamer didn't budge. She pushed the lens closer until it was inches from my nose. "Look at her, guys. Not a single tear. True sociopath behavior." I looked straight into the camera lens, and a cold smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Do you even know what my daughter looks like?" I asked. The girl stumbled over her words. "Don't try to change the subject." "You don't," I said, "you have no idea. Which is why you're so comfortable shoving any random girl in front of my face and forcing me to confess." Hearing this, the girl on the floor curled into a tight ball, trembling violently as if struck. "Mom, it hurts. Please don't disown me." The uproar outside reached a fever pitch, rattling the window panes. Captain Hayes gave me a long, unreadable look, then pulled out the handcuffs. "Karen Vance, you're under arrest for illegal confinement and aggravated assault. You have the right to remain silent." As the freezing metal snapped around my wrists, my eyes caught the girl peeking out from beneath the dark jacket. She was crying, yes, but deep in her eyes, there wasn't a single trace of panic, confusion, or fear. She knew exactly who I was. Captain Hayes grabbed my arm and shielded me as we pushed through the front door. A plastic water bottle flew out of the crowd, striking his shoulder hard. He didn't even flinch, calling out to the patrolman forming a barricade, "Keep the suspect safe. Anyone who breaks the line gets taken down." Just as they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, the girl gripped the doorframe of the house and shrieked at the flashing lights and crowds. "Mom! Please don't throw me back into the basement." The entire street went dead silent for a fraction of a second, before violent chaos erupted all over again. Captain Hayes slammed the cruiser door shut, climbed into the front seat, and looked at me through the rearview mirror. "All right, Karen," he said, "let's go to the station. And you're going to tell me everything. How do you explain these?" In the interrogation room, Captain Hayes slid a thick stack of invoices across the table. Heavy-duty chains, soundproofing foam, liquid nutrition, a portable toilet, and industrial disinfectant. Every single signature on the delivery receipts bore my name. I stared at them for a long time. "The handwriting is forged." Captain Hayes replied, "We'll send it for ink and handwriting analysis." "Is the shipping address my house?" "Yes." "What about the delivery confirmation videos?" Captain Hayes hesitated, staying quiet. I understood immediately. The person in the video is wearing a baseball cap and a surgical mask. Their build matches mine. Captain Hayes' pen froze against his notepad. "How did you know that?" "Because 3 years ago, right after my daughter vanished, someone used the exact same trick to pick up her school uniform from the dry cleaners." A sharp knock broke the silence, and the door swung open. An officer leaned in, lowering his voice. "Captain, David Caldwell is here." My fingers curled into tight fists. Captain Hayes glanced at me. "Your ex-husband requested to cooperate with the investigation." "He's not here to cooperate." "Then why is he here?" "To cry for the camera lenses." Sure enough, David's voice echoed through the hallway outside. He was always like this. Rolling his sandalwood prayer beads in his left hand, spouting nonsense about how everything he did was for the child. David's voice drifted through the door. "I told everyone years ago that Karen was mentally unstable. When Claire scraped her knee as a little girl, Karen berated the babysitter until she was in tears, threatening to sue her and destroy her career. I thought she was just overly controlling. I had no idea she could be this sick." A reporter asked, "Mr. Caldwell, do you suspect your ex-wife was involved in Claire's disappearance 3 years ago?" David choked up right on cue, his voice cracking with precision. I never wanted to believe it. But looking at all this evidence today, as Claire's father, my heart feels like it's being ripped out with a serrated knife. Another woman's voice cut in, soft and soothing. "Please, everyone, stop overwhelming the poor victim." Veronica Smith Caldwell had arrived. Her social media handle was Veronica Saves Children, and her feed was packed with videos of her tearing up while holding orphans. Every time a camera pointed her way, she would gently dab the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She announced smoothly to the press, "I'm David's current wife. I'm personally donating $1 million to cover all of this girl's therapy and medical bills. She was hurt by her biological mother, so please, let me show her what a true mother's love feels like." The crowd outside burst into praise. "Veronica is so sweet. A real angel. Proof that stepmothers can be 1,000,000 times better than birth mothers." I stared through the two-way mirror, a heavy, sick lump forming in my stomach. Captain Hayes broke the silence. "Karen, the hospital staff just sent over preliminary notes from when they spoke with the girl. The girl described the birthmark behind your right shoulder blade. She knew you've been taking Prion sleeping pills for years. She even knew you kept her baby teeth in a wooden box inside the third drawer of your nightstand." I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut until I saw spots. David knew all of those things. Captain Hayes fixed his gaze on me. "He's been divorced from you for 3 years. The exact day my daughter went missing was the day we signed the divorce papers." The room went dead silent. 3 years ago, Claire didn't come home from middle school. David's first instinct wasn't to call the police. He slid a business transfer agreement across the kitchen counter. "Sign this first," he had said. "The moment you sign, I'll use every resource in my network to find our daughter." I refused. He slapped me across the face, saying that I didn't deserve to be a mother. Captain Hayes leaned forward. Why didn't you mention this back then? I did, I said, meeting his eyes. It's right there in the police report. Captain Hayes immediately turned to his officer. Pull up every single case file from 3 years ago. Now. The interrogation room door swung open again. An officer walked in holding an evidence bag made of clear plastic. Inside was an old, faded sundress, stained with dark brown, dried blood. Captain Hayes lowered his tone. Found stuffed inside a gap in the basement drywall. Initial field tests show the blood belongs to Claire. My head snapped up, my heart pounding against my ribs. Run a full, comprehensive lab retest. We will. Do it right now. Captain Hayes looked at me, his expression unreadable. Karen, I know you're frantic, but we can't skip protocol. A sharp wail rang out from the lobby outside. David's mother, Monica Caldwell, had arrived. The old woman was waving a banner with giant black lettering, practically trying to throw herself through the police station doors. Give me back my granddaughter, you monster. Officers, don't let her play the victim. Our family took care of her for 10 whole years, and she turns around and tortures her own flesh and blood. Staring at the banner, a sudden memory flashed through my mind, Claire's 7th birthday. Monica had pushed the birthday cake away from Claire and handed the biggest slice to David's friend's son, claiming little girls shouldn't eat sweet stuff or they'd grow up spoiled. Claire hadn't cried. She just quietly put her fork back on the plate. Outside the glass, Veronica gently held the sobbing woman, her voice sickeningly sweet. Monica, don't worry. Justice will give Claire the answer she deserves. Monica grabbed Veronica's hand, weeping. Veronica, sweetie, you act more like a real mother than that witch ever did. Captain Hayes placed an arrest warrant on the desk in front of me. Karen, we have sufficient evidence to hold you in custody. You have the right to an attorney. You can also choose to continue giving your statement. I looked past him toward the blurry silhouette of David standing behind the two-way glass. He was using his prayer beads to hide the subtle twist of his lips. I asked, my voice deadly calm, Captain Hayes, if someone constructs a trail of evidence that is too perfect, doesn't that make it suspicious? Captain Hayes didn't answer. He picked up his pen, his voice flat and even. Sign the papers, Karen. Karen, today we're taking you back to the scene for a walkthrough. Captain Hayes stood at the holding cell doorway, his back rigid. I looked at the heavy stab-proof vest in his hands. Is that for me? It's for protocol, he said flatly. Even a suspect gets protected from mob justice. When the police cruiser pulled up outside my house, the screaming started before I even put a foot on the pavement. Bring the murderer out. Basement monster. Get out of the way of the camera, let us see her face. The car door swung open. A rotten egg slammed against the shield of a riot officer, yellow sludge splattering across the back of my hand. Then, someone threw rocks. Captain Hayes jerked his arm up to block it, the impact leaving a violent red mark across his wrist. Get back, he bellowed at the mob, anyone crossing the police tape gets arrested on the spot. A man holding a phone high above his head screamed back, you're still protecting her? She locked her own daughter in a hole for 3 years, where's your humanity? Captain Hayes pinned him with an icy glare. The law doesn't exist to serve your vigilante mob. When they escorted me inside, Veronica was already standing in the middle of my living room. She was dressed entirely in pristine white, a gold Charity Foundation pin gleaming on her lapel. David stood right behind her, a thick manila folder in his grip. Karen, he murmured softly. A wave of nausea hit me. Don't say my name. David let out a long sigh. Even now, you're going to act this stubborn? Veronica stepped forward, holding out a document. Karen, this is a formal relinquishment form for David's company shares. If you sign it, we'll hire the best defense team money can buy to make sure your sentence is lightened. I looked at her. You want to use my property to fund your charity act? Veronica leaned in, lowering her voice so only I could hear, a cruel smile touching the corners of her lips. Don't make it sound so ugly. What do you even have left? David took a sharp step closer. Don't you want to know where Claire's body is? My breath hitched violently, catching in my throat. He stared directly into my eyes, his whisper deadly quiet. Sign the papers. Confess to the crime. And I'll tell you where her body is before you spend the rest of your life in prison. I clenched my hands into fists, the steel handcuffs biting deep into my skin. Captain Hayes turned around sharply. What are you two saying to her? Veronica's eyes flooded with tears instantly. Captain, I was just pleading with her not to traumatize the victim any further. Right on cue, the squeak of wheelchair tires echoed from the entryway. The rescued girl was wheeled into the room. The moment her eyes landed on me, her entire body began to tremble violently. No. Please. Don't let her look at me. A female officer dropped to one knee, stroking her hair. We're here. Nobody is going to hurt you. The girl suddenly sank her teeth into her own forearm, biting down hard. Dark red blood oozed out almost instantly. Mom said if I say one wrong word, I have to punish myself like this, she whimpered. I won't do it again, I swear. Outside, the live streamers in the yard lost their minds entirely. She still refuses to plead guilty. Look what she did to that poor girl. Give her the death penalty. A middle-aged man wearing a hard hat was surrounded by reporters near the front steps. Someone introduced him as a famous local structural engineer named Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks held up a blueprint roll, facing the lenses. I just reviewed the renovation records for this house from 3 years ago. The load-bearing layout, the ventilation ducting of this basement, every single detail matches the owner's remodel permit. A reporter pushed a microphone into his face. So, Karen Vance definitely built the basement? Mr. Brooks adjusted his glasses. From a professional standpoint, absolutely. I looked over at Captain Hayes. Who provided those blueprints? Mr. Brooks cut in before Captain Hayes could speak. They were retrieved directly from the property management archives. Fully stamped and official. Who signed them? Mr. Brooks clicked his tongue in annoyance. The homeowner, obviously. Karen Vance. A cold laugh escaped my throat. Did you ever see the original physical document? Mr. Brooks' expression darkened. You're a criminal suspect. Don't question my credentials. David chimed in immediately. Mr. Brooks is a renowned expert in structural engineering. Are you going to slander experts now too? Veronica sighed delicately. Karen, just admit what you did. Stop treating everyone like fools. Suddenly, the crowd smashed through the perimeter line outside. A brick flew through the shattered window frame, flying straight toward my head. Captain Hayes shoved me out of the way. The brick struck him dead center in the back with a terrifying, dull thud. He stumbled forward, his knees buckling for a split second, but he managed to stay on his feet. Everyone fall back, he ordered through gritted teeth, protect the scene. Secure the perimeter. I stared at the blood soaking through the fabric on his shoulder and back, then looked at David, whose face was barely hiding a look of triumph. Veronica was still dabbing tears for the camera lenses. Everyone please stay calm. The law will punish the wicked. I drew myself up, standing tall. Captain Hayes frowned, wincing in pain. Karen, don't move. I lifted my head, locking eyes with David. You spent so much effort stacking all this perfect evidence. Did you ever consider that making it too perfect is exactly how you give yourselves away? David's face froze. Veronica, however, let out a small laugh. Karen, everything out of your mouth right now sounds like pathetic desperation. I ignored her completely and turned my head toward Captain Hayes. Captain, get your officers to safety first. Final confirmation. Everyone, step back. Captain Hayes stood in the storage room doorway, battered and bruised, his voice raspy and harsh. Mr. Brooks held a pen, ready in front of the reporter's cameras. I'm willing to sign. I'll stake my 30 years of professional experience on this. The basement under this house was illegally excavated by the owner. The forensics team and crime scene investigators ignored the flashing cameras, steadily following protocol as they cross-checked their sample numbers. Captain Hayes shot Mr. Brooks a sharp look. Your report stays limited to technical findings. You don't get to declare criminal liability. Mr. Brooks sneered, clearly annoyed. Captain Hayes, I know where the line is. Then, David walked up to me, shoving the agreement back into my space. Karen, stop dragging this out, he spat. Sign this, and I'll tell my parents to stop raising hell. Plead guilty, and I'll even ask the judge for leniency. My eyes dropped to the sandalwood prayer beads wrapped around his wrist. Years ago, when Claire went missing, he had paced back and forth while rubbing those exact same beads, telling me that a missing child could always be found, but lost company shares were gone forever. Veronica stood glued to his side, her voice dripping with sickly sweet concern. Karen, David is only doing this out of the goodness of his heart. Anyone else would have left you to rot. I stared at her. Do you enjoy playing mom that much? A flash of cold fury flickered across Veronica's eyes. At least I wouldn't lock a child in a basement. In her wheelchair, the young girl suddenly began to tremble violently. Mommy, please don't yell at Aunt Veronica. She bought me my medicine. The second she said it, every camera lens swung toward Veronica. A staff member cast the live stream's comments section onto a nearby display screen. What a saint of a stepmom. How is Karen still alive? How does she show her face? 50 million people are online, waiting for the verdict. David shoved the pen into my hand. Sign it. I didn't take it. He leaned in close to whisper, you think Captain Hayes can shield you? You don't sign today, and the internet will tear you apart alive tomorrow. Veronica leaned into my ear, her breath warm against my skin. I actually know where Claire's bones are buried. My fingers froze. Her laugh was barely a whisper. Too bad you don't deserve to ask. Captain Hayes sensed something wrong and stepped in immediately. Mrs. Caldwell, step back. Veronica looked up, her eyes brimming with hurt. I was just trying to talk some sense into her. Taking advantage of the chaos, David slammed the paper hard against my chest. Karen, you owe everyone an explanation. You owe Claire more than you can ever repay. I looked down at the white sheet of paper. The living room was choked with media crews. Outside the house, a mob was howling for my blood. Inside the storage room lay the entrance to the so-called basement. The handcuffs cut deep into my wrists, the dried blood crusting over my skin. Suddenly, I snapped my hands up and tore the agreement straight down the middle. David froze in shock. I ripped it again. Paper scraps rained down over him. He flinched, taking a step back in pure shock. Veronica's cool composure finally shattered. Are you out of your mind? I locked eyes with her. Only a lunatic digs up someone else's house to build their own grave. Mr. Brooks frowned, his forehead creasing deeply. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I didn't give him an answer. Reaching inside the inner lining of my jacket, I pulled out a secure, tamper-evident document folder. Printed across its front was nothing but a serial number and a bold, red security seal. The moment Captain Hayes caught sight of that seal, his pupils shrank to pinpricks. He raised his hand instantly. Everyone, turn off the cameras. Stop recording right now. Several officers surged forward, blocking the lenses with their bodies. The reporters refused to yield. Why can't we film? Is the police department covering for Karen? Captain Hayes' voice roared across the room, booming with authority. This involves classified government intelligence. Turn off your equipment immediately. I held up a hand, stopping him. Cover the core technical parameters. Let them see whatever can be made public. Captain Hayes looked at me, his voice pitching up with unmistakable shock. Karen, are you sure about this? David let out a harsh bark of laughter. Forging government documents now? Karen, you've lost your mind. Veronica slipped back into her fragile, innocent act. Captain Hayes, a woman like her will pull anything. Don't let her trick you. I handed the secure folder to Captain Hayes, flipping it open only to the structural layout page. Then I spun around and faced Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks, I said, every word dripping with cold precision, you didn't even check the actual geological classification of this plot of land, yet you dared to stake your entire career on it? Mr. Brooks' face turned an ugly shade of ash gray. What are you talking about? I pointed directly at the smashed open wall inside the storage room. Officers, take a long, hard look at the master architectural plans for this building. There's no physical way I could have dug out that basement. David lunged forward to grab the file, but Captain Hayes shoved him back violently. I scanned the room, looking into the eyes of every single person waiting for me to confess, and spoke my final words, cold and clear, because this house doesn't have a basement at all. Silence dropped over the living room like a heavy iron door. Captain Hayes held the classified folder open in his rough, blood-stained hands. His thumb traced the embossed red seal of the State Department of Transportation and Geological Survey. Outside, the chants of the mob faltered as people realized the police had physically thrown themselves in front of the live camera lenses. Mr. Brooks, Captain Hayes said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. He didn't look up from the blueprints. Read line 4 of section B. Brooks swallowed hard. The engineer took a hesitant step forward, his polished dress shoes crunching on broken window glass. Captain, whatever document she pulled out of her coat, it's obviously. Read it, Hayes barked, slamming the folder down onto the coffee table. Brooks flinched. He leaned over, his eyes scanning the technical schematic. As he read, the color drained from his lips, leaving them the grayish hue of wet cement. House number 140 Maple Ridge Lane, Hayes read aloud for the bodycam audio. His words cutting through the tense room. Constructed directly atop a Class 1 solid granite bedrock shelf and a high-pressure municipal natural gas trunk line. Excavation beyond 18 inches below the slab is classified as an explosive hazard and prohibited under federal law. Any underground structural modification would require heavy machinery, explosives, and federal clearance. Hayes looked up, his gray eyes turning into flint. Karen Vance bought this property 4 years ago. The gas line beneath this floor was inspected 6 months before her daughter vanished. The foundation is a solid 6-inch reinforced concrete slab laid directly over impenetrable stone. He turned slowly to face Mr. Brooks. Now, Mr. Brooks, tell me how a single mother, using hand tools, dug an 8-foot deep, 600 square foot basement through 3 feet of solid granite and a live high-pressure gas main without blowing up the entire block. Brooks opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Sweat broke out across his forehead, running down into his collar. The blueprints provided by property management. The blueprints provided by Caldwell Development, I corrected, stepping past David. David's face twitched. That's a lie. I have nothing to do with property management. You bought the management company 6 months ago through an offshore LLC, I said, meeting his panicked glare. You owned the archives. You altered the digitized blueprint files on the public server. But you forgot one thing. David. I pointed to the paper scraps scattered across the floor, the share transfer agreement I had just shredded. When my father built this neighborhood 30 years ago, he worked directly with the Municipal Transit Authority. He kept the original, hand-drafted civil engineering schematics with the Federal Land Registry. He sealed them in a private trust for Claire. The only way to open that file was for me to initiate a legal audit of the property deed. David's hand went into his coat pocket, his fingers frantically working his sandalwood prayer beads, turning them so fast the wood clattered. Veronica's eyes flicked from David to Captain Hayes. Her calculated, saintly mask was beginning to fray at the edges. Captain, this is absurd. A paper discrepancy doesn't change what is right in front of your eyes. Look at that. Poor girl. She was pulled out from under this house. She wasn't pulled out from under my house, I said smoothly. I walked past the media crews, past the stunned officers, directly into the rear storage room. The heavy wooden door leading underground stood wide open, its frame shattered by the police battering ram. I didn't step down into the dark opening. Instead, I reached over to the wall beside the frame and grabbed a handful of loose drywall dust, letting it sallow through my fingers. Captain Hayes, I called out. Bring your crime scene techs in here. Hayes signaled 2 forensically draped officers into the small room. Look at the direction of the structural shear, I said, pointing to the ragged edges of the hole behind the utility shelving. If someone inside my house spent 3 years digging outward, the concrete debris and drywall dust would be piled outside, pushed away from the living room. The lead forensic officer dropped to his knees, shining a high-intensity ultraviolet torch along the floorboards. The dust displacement is inward, the officer reported instantly. The wall was cut from the other side. The support beams were sawed through from outside this property. And what is on the other side of that wall? I asked. Hayes stepped up to the hole, shining his flashlight into the dark corridor. Beyond. The passage didn't go down. It went sideways, a horizontal trench dug beneath the fence line. House number 142, Hayes whispered. The vacant property next door. It's not vacant anymore, I said, looking back over my shoulder at Veronica. Check the land registry, Captain. House 142 was purchased 2 months ago by the Veronica Saves Children Foundation. The silence in the room this time was absolute. Outside, the live streamers who had been screaming for my execution were staring at their phone screens. The comment section on the broadcast was moving so fast. It was a blur of white text. Wait, the wall was cut from next door? She didn't have a basement? Look at the structural engineer. He's shaking. Is Caldwell Development Real Estate framing her? What is happening? Veronica took a slow, deliberate step back toward the front entrance. This is a misunderstanding. The foundation bought that house to turn it into a youth shelter. We haven't even broken ground on renovations yet. Then how did a fresh concrete saw, covered in high-density drywall dust, end up in the garage of House 142? A young officer jogged through the front door, holding a sealed evidence bag containing a heavy-duty industrial cutter. Captain, the officer panted, we just checked the perimeter of House 142. The side door lock was picked from the inside, and there's fresh mortar drying in the adjoining crawlspace. Someone punched through the foundation of 142 into Mrs. Vance's storage closet 3 days ago. David's prayer beads snapped. The wooden balls hit the hardwood floor like hail, bouncing in every direction. Rolling beneath the couch, hitting the shoes of the police officers. David didn't look down to pick them up. His face was gray, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. Veronica, you told me the permits were clean. Shut up, David. Veronica hissed, her voice dropping the sweet, melodic tone she used for the press. For a split second, her eyes held pure, venomous malice. I walked over to the wheelchair where the terrified girl was still sitting, wrapped in the officer's jacket. She was staring at the floor, her hands raw, where she had bitten her own skin. I knelt down in front of her. I didn't reach out to touch her. I kept my hands visible, resting softly on my own knees. What's your real name? I asked gently. The girl trembled violently. I'm Claire. I'm Claire Vance. You're not Claire, I said quietly. Claire has a small, horseshoe-shaped scar on her left knee from when she fell off her tricycle when she was 5. You don't have that scar. The girl's shoulders hitched, a fresh sob rising in her chest. It's okay, I whispered, keeping my voice low so only she could hear. They promised you something, didn't they? They told you that if you played this part, they'd pay off your family's debts. Or did they tell you they'd hurt you if you didn't? The girl looked up. Her eyes weren't those of a hardened actor, they were the eyes of a desperate, terrified teenager pulled from the fringe of society. They said my mother's medical bills would be paid, she whispered, her voice cracking. They said you were a terrible person who stole money from children. Who gave you the details about my house? I asked. The sleeping pills? The wooden box in my drawer? The girl slowly shifted her eyes toward David. He did, she sobbed, pointing a trembling finger straight at my ex-husband. He brought me to a hotel 2 weeks ago. He made me memorize the layout of your bedroom. He gave me the clothes to wear. He told me to bite myself if the police asked too many questions. The media crews erupted. Microphones were shoved into David's face before the police could even clear the space. Mr. Caldwell. Did you frame your ex-wife? Did you pay this girl to impersonate your missing daughter? Where is the real Claire Vance? Back off. David screamed, swinging his arms wildly at the reporters. Get those cameras out of my face. I didn't do anything. It was Veronica. It was all her idea. David, you spineless coward. Veronica shrieked, dropping all pretense. She lunged toward him, her long fingernails clawing at his face. You wanted her shares. You needed the corporate takeover before the board audit next week. You begged me to use the foundation's network. Captain Hayes didn't waste another second. Officers, arrest both of them. Charges: structural tampering, conspiracy to frame, falsifying evidence, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. Handcuffs clicked into place, this time, around the wrists of David Caldwell and Veronica Smith. As the officers dragged David toward the door, I stepped into his path. He looked at me, his eyes wide with frantic, ugly panic. Karen. Please. Talk to Hayes. It was a mistake. We can work this out. I can help you. Find Claire. I swear I can help you. I looked at him, feeling nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. You don't know where Claire is, I said softly. You never did. I do. David yelled as he was hauled across the threshold. Veronica knows. Ask Veronica. I turned to Veronica. She was being held by 2 female officers, her hair disheveled, her pristine white outfit covered in concrete dust from the room. She was glaring at me with raw hatred. Where is she, Veronica? I asked. Veronica let out a cold, bitter laugh. You think you won, Karen? You think because you proved your house doesn't have a basement, you get your happy ending? You'll never find her. She's been gone 3 years. She's dust. I stared at her for 3 long seconds. Then, I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out the printed copy of the essay that Captain Hayes had set on the table. I pointed to the bottom corner, to the faint, blue crescent moon drawn in ink. Veronica, I said, my voice echoing off the broken walls. The fake daughter. Didn't write this essay. She didn't even know what the crescent moon meant. Veronica's laughter died instantly. Her jaw tightened. This essay was submitted to the national contest through an IP address routed. Through the Veronica Saves Children Foundation main office, I continued. Stepping closer to her. You thought you intercepted it and altered the address. To frame me. But you didn't write that crescent moon. The girl who actually wrote this message is still alive. And she's inside your foundation building. Right now. The rain began to fall in heavy, rhythmic sheets as the convoy of police cruisers tore through the city, sirens screaming into the night. I sat in the front passenger seat of Captain Hayes' command vehicle. He was driving fast, his dark eyes fixed on the slick asphalt ahead. His shoulder was bandaged where the brick had hit him, but his grip on the steering wheel was iron. The tactical team is 5 minutes out from Hope Haven Sanctuary, Hayes said. Into his radio shoulder mic, secure all exits. No one enters or leaves the premises until I arrive. I looked out the window at the blurred city lights. 3 years. 3 years of quiet, suffocating grief. 3 years of sitting in an empty house, staring at a phone that never rang, while the world whispered that I was a cold, heartless mother who had let her child slip away. David hadn't cared about Claire. To David, Claire was leverage, a pawn to be traded during a corporate divorce, a tragedy to be monetized for public sympathy. And when Claire became a liability, when she saw something she wasn't supposed to see on the day of our divorce, David and Veronica had made her vanish. They hadn't killed her. Dead bodies leave evidence. Dead bodies bring murder. Charges that never expire. Instead, Veronica, the saintly head of $1 million child charity, had hidden Claire right under the world's nose, buried inside the subterranean vaults of her private sanctuary. Karen, Hayes said softly, breaking the silence. When we get inside, you stay behind the tactical officers. If there's a situation, I'm coming with you, I said. It wasn't an argument. It was a fact. Hayes looked at me, saw the look in my eyes, and didn't press the matter. Understood. 5 minutes later, the cruisers screeched to a halt outside Hope Haven Sanctuary, a massive, gated brick estate situated on the outskirts of the city. The media streams had followed us. Dozens of news vans and independent reporters pulled up onto the grass, their headlights illuminating the imposing iron gates. The narrative had completely flipped across the nation. The headline running across every news network read: Massive conspiracy unraveled, charity foundation under investigation for kidnapping and framing mother. Officers smashed through the heavy wrought iron gates with a ram. The tactical unit flooded into the main courtyard, heavily armed, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Police. Search warrant. Clear the hallways. The staff inside the main building fell into complete chaos. Workers in crisp white uniforms threw their hands in the air as tactical officers swept room after room. I walked behind Hayes, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Where is the lower level access? Hayes demanded, grabbing a trembling staff member by the collar. There is no lower level, the employee stammered. This is just administrative offices and dormitories. Don't lie to me. Hayes roared, slamming a floor plan onto the front desk. Where is the utility elevator? I ignored their shouting. I walked down the long, carpeted corridor of the main administrative wing, looking at the paintings on the wall. Pictures of Veronica holding hands with smiling orphans. Pictures of charity galas, ribbon cuttings, awards. A sickening wall of lies. I stopped in front of a heavy oak bookshelf at the far end of the hallway. On the third shelf sat a small, wooden trinket, a carved wooden box, painted with soft pastel flowers. My breath caught in my throat. It was the exact duplicate of the wooden box I kept in my nightstand drawer, the box where I used to keep Claire's baby teeth. David had stolen the real box from my house, but Veronica had kept a replica here. I pulled the box off the shelf. Behind it was a metallic keycard reader. Hayes. I called out. Hayes rushed over, followed by 2 tactical officers with breacher tools. Stand back. The officers wedged a heavy crowbar into the seam beside the bookshelf and pulled with all their weight. With a sharp, cracking sound of splintering wood, And popping metal hydraulics, the entire bookshelf swung open, revealing a reinforced steel door behind it. A heavy, industrial airlock. A real basement. Get the hydraulic spreader, Hayes ordered. The officers hooked up a heavy tool to the edge of the steel door. The machine hummed, the steel frame groaning under thousands of pounds of pressure, until finally, with a deafening screech of tearing metal, the lock snapped. A rush of cold, damp air flowed out from the dark staircase beyond. It smelled of damp concrete, bleach, and copper. Flashlights up, Hayes commanded, pulling his sidearm. Move in. We descended the narrow, spiral concrete steps. The sound of our boots echoed off the cold walls. Down here, deep beneath the foundation of the sanctuary, the sounds of the outside world, the rain, the sirens, the crowds, faded into absolute silence. At the bottom of the stairs lay a long, brightly lit hallway lined with heavy steel doors, each fitted with a small, reinforced glass viewport. This wasn't a charity. It was a private prison. Check every room, Hayes yelled. Officers moved down the corridor, peering through the glass panels. I ran past them, my eyes searching frantically through each window. Empty storage rooms. Medical supplies. Discarded furniture. Then, at the very end of the hall, behind a door reinforced with double magnetic locks, I saw it. A small, windowless room. Inside sat a small wooden desk, a single twin bed, and a lamp. Sitting at the desk was a teenage girl. She was thin, her skin pale from years without sunlight, her long brown hair tied back with a simple piece of string. She was wearing an oversized gray sweater. In her right hand, she held a pen. Spread across her desk were hundreds of sheets of paper, essays, poems, stories. All written in neat, precise cursive. She didn't jump when the heavy metal tools began smashing against her door lock. She didn't look up in terror. She just kept writing, her hand moving methodically across the page, as if she had learned long ago that noises outside meant nothing. Claire. I screamed, slamming my hands against the reinforced glass. Claire. The girl's hand froze. Slowly, very slowly, her head turned toward the window. Her eyes, the exact shade of warm amber as my own, met mine through the thick glass. Mom, she whispered. The heavy lock shattered. The steel door swung open with a heavy thud. I didn't care about the crime scene. I didn't care about evidence, or protocol. Or Captain Hayes calling my name. I threw myself across the room, falling to my knees beside her chair, and wrapped my arms around her frail, shivering body. I'm here, I sobbed, the tears I had held back for 3 agonizing years finally bursting free, burning my face. I'm here, baby. I'm here. Claire didn't scream. She didn't pull away. She slowly lifted her arms and buried her face into the crook of my neck, clinging to me with a force that proved she was real, she was breathing, she was alive. You found the moon, she whimpered, her voice tiny and raspy. I drew it on the paper. I knew if anyone saw it, you'd know. I knew, I choked out, pressing my lips against her hair. I knew the second I saw it. Hayes stepped into the doorway, his gun lowered, his eyes soft. He looked at the stacks of essay papers on the desk. She submitted dozens of them, Hayes murmured, looking at the entry forms. Stamped with National Literary Contest logos. Every time Veronica brought in educational materials to keep her compliant, Claire slipped an essay into the outgoing mail stack. Veronica's staff thought they intercepted all of them. They missed one. Claire pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes, her fingers brushing away my tears. They told me you forgot about me, Claire whispered, a tiny, sad smile touching her lips. They told me you signed the papers and moved away. But every time I wrote a story, I drew the moon at the bottom. Because you told me when I was little, that as long as we look at the same moon, we're never really apart. I held her face in my hands, kissing her forehead over and over again. I never stopped looking, I told her. I never stopped looking for a single second. 3 months later. The morning sun broke through the gray autumn clouds, painting the front porch of my house in brilliant shades of gold and amber. The mob was gone. The yellow police tape had been cleared away weeks ago. The shattered window in my living room had been replaced with clear, strong glass. House number 142 next door sat empty, seized by federal authorities alongside every asset tied to the Veronica Saves Children Foundation. David Caldwell and Veronica Smith were currently sitting in a state penitentiary, awaiting trial on federal kidnapping, conspiracy, human trafficking, and corporate fraud charges. With the evidence gathered from the sanctuary's hidden server room, prosecutors were seeking maximum sentences without the possibility of parole. Mr. Brooks, the structural engineer, had surrendered his license and was facing heavy criminal indictment for accepting bribes to forge public safety documents. The media, as predictable as ever, had tried to turn me into a national hero, the fearless mother who dismantled a multi-million-dollar charity ring to save her child. I refused every interview. I didn't want their cameras. I didn't want their sympathy. I sat on the front porch swing, a warm cup of coffee resting in my lap. The front door opened softly. Claire stepped out onto the porch, wearing a soft yellow cardigan. Her skin had recovered its healthy color, her cheeks fuller, her eyes bright and clear. She was holding a sketch pad in her lap. She sat down beside me on the swing, leaning her head gently against my shoulder. "What are you drawing?" I asked softly, setting my cup down. Claire turned the page toward me. It wasn't a picture of a basement. It wasn't a picture of a dark room or heavy steel doors. It was a sketch of our house, bathed in bright sunlight, with the garden flowers blooming along the fence line. And in the corner of the sky, drawn in soft blue pencil, was a tiny, delicate crescent moon. "I don't need to draw it to call for help anymore," Claire said, looking out at the peaceful, quiet street. I wrapped my arm around her shoulder, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her breath against the morning breeze. "No, you don't," I whispered. "We're home."